City Planning Commission of the City of Berkeley. Today is Tuesday, July 24th, 2018. Would you please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. McLean, could you please take the roll, please?
Kempner.
Here.
Murad.
Here.
Patterson.
Here.
Richardson.
Here.
Shadle.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Trotto.
Here.
And Buckler.
Here.
Commissioner Kapelansky is out of town this week, so she is unable to attend this evening.
Okay, could we have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
Motion to approve. Support.
Discussion?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I wondered if we should move the last two items up to the top to get that business out of the way. Is there a reason why? We usually did that all in the past, always did it first.
We did do it first, and my comments to Mr. McLean were that it was a very long time that we had the same chair, so it was very comfortable to take over the meeting.
Okay.
Last year, when I became chair, and it was very, there was no time to prep, I was very unprepared and very shaky, and we have a public hearing and some ordinance mentions, so that's why I left it to the end, so that nobody is put on the spot.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
That was why
All right, I'm fine with it
But I am
then.
happy to take a motion to move them up.
No, I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Just was wondering why.
Right. Any other discussion? All right, take the roll, please.
Murad.
Yes.
Patterson.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Shadle.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Trotto.
Yes.
Kempner.
Yes.
And Buckler.
Yes. Okay, we have minutes from the June, 24th? What day was that? June 26th meeting. May I have a recommendation, or a motion to approve?
Recommend approval.
Support? Support. All right, discussion?
Madam Chair, before you, I had made one amendment to the public comment section. I misquoted a resident during the public hearing portion of the Wassalet item. That comment has been corrected. Comment was under Mr. Joshua Hunter.
Do we have the corrected copy, or
Yes,
is the
those are
these
the
are the
corrected
corrected copies?
copies, yes.
Okay, very good. All right. Any other discussion or items of note?
One more item. Under liaison reports, you have Chair Buckler making a comment, but she wasn't here.
That's true. I did not comment. I was here in spirit. So, would you like to amend the motion to accept the minutes as corrected?
Absolutely.
And support?
Support.
All right. Mr. Murad, could you call the roll?
Patterson.
Yes.
Or Mr. McLean?
Richardson.
Yes.
Shadle.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Trotto.
Yes.
Kempner.
Yes.
Murad.
Yes.
Buckler.
Yes. Okay, so we have communications. We have a letter from a Mr. Jim Phillips. I assume he is a Berkeley resident. It doesn't say. And the letter has been put into record. Are there any other communications that did not make the agenda that came in after the time point?
None at this time. Also included, there was a link with all of the written commentary that we received on the PUD prior to the last meeting. So there'll be a record of that entered in with the minutes.
Okay, that's fine. That's good. All right. So, citizen comments. Any citizens that have comments for items that are not on the agenda, please come forward, state your name and city of residence. Seeing nobody rushing to the microphone, we'll move on to the first order of business. Well, before the first order of business, I'd like to hear from our two new commissioners. We have Matthew Trotto and Greg Patterson, who have joined us. Mr. Trotto, since you were, I think, appointed first before Mr. Patterson, why don't you give us a very brief Intro to yourself.
I've lived in Berkeley since approximately 1998. I bought my first house in Phillips, left for about a year, came back after my divorce, and moved to Bacon. Lived in Bacon until 2014 when I moved over to Cumberland, where we built our house there. We've been ever since. Coached for the Berkeley Steelers, coached for the Little League T-ball teams, spent a lot of time in the community. Kids go to Angel Elementary and go to Berkeley Building Blocks. Been in the construction industry since 1996. I spent a lot of time dealing with city ordinances on a regular basis, building all over the state. I'm mostly focused on the electrical industry, and I do a lot of design build work when it comes to the electrical end of it. So I spend a lot of time reading through ordinances to find out how close I can be to property lines, how much noise the generator can make, how much pollution we can put out from the, that kind of stuff. Just a lot of the time that I spend there is just reading up from ordinances just to make sure they meet codes. So that's kind of my history in the building world.
Very good. Mr. Harrison.
I live in Berkeley about 7.5 years. I'm a nurse by trade. I work for Beaumont now in the corporate sector. I've been interested in the Planning Commission for the last few years. I started coming to the meetings and watching online, and I'm honored to be part of it now.
Oh, welcome. Welcome, both of you. Okay, so our first order of business, number 1, is a public hearing for ordinance amendment, Chapter 138, Article 6, Division 7, Site Plan Review. Mr. McLean, can you give us a rundown?
Yes, from our previous meetings, we've been discussing amendments to the ordinance to allow for administrative approval of accessory structures. This kind of came about roughly last fall when an applicant was proposing to put an accessory structure at the Berkeley Marathon Station. And I believe it was Commissioner Kaplansky that said, why don't we have these as approved by administration rather than have the whole planning commission, take this up. So basically, it's a minor amendment, basically stating that accessory structures can be approved administratively. Attorney Starren has reviewed the proposed amendment, and there have been no issues. This would have appeared on the agenda last month. However, I missed the deadline for public hearing notice.
Okay. So, this is a public hearing, so the public is welcome. The citizens, residents are welcome to come forward and give comment on it. Please approach the microphone, give us your name and city of residence. All items were in the packet as if they weren't already in the packet, they were links.
They're linked.
Seeing no residents come to the microphone, Mr. McLean, were there any written comments received on this matter?
No comments were received.
All right, I close the public hearing. So, the next item of business is the ordinance amendment, Chapter 138, Article 6, Division 7, Site Plan Review, Attachment Accessory Structure Ordinance Amendment for the planning commissioners. Is there a motion on the item?
I'll make a motion. Madam Chair, I would move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of an amendment to Section 138-678 of the ordinance to add subparagraph 3 is set forth in the draft that we've been provided with.
Is there support?
Support.
Okay, very good. Discussion?
Yeah, I have something I want to bring up because I think the old quilt shop and soon to be right there in 12 Mile, just west of
Transmission?
no, not the transmission, just west of Coolidge on the
You're
north side.
referring to where Tootie and Tallulah's
Yeah,
is moving
Tootie
in?
and Tallulah's.
Oh, yeah,
That's
that's,
like a big major change, and I know it was done administratively to approve it, but the facade has really changed a lot, because I think they have haven't they increased the window size?
The facade changes have not been more than 50%.
Okay. Is that because we include all facades, or we just include the front facade?
All facades.
Okay.
I seem to recall it's kind of being restored back to when it was a drugstore.
Yeah.
Because when the quilt shop, they kind of blocked off a lot of that.
Well,
because
no, it
they
was
didn't want the
even,
daylight.
yeah, could be, but I know when it came before us many years ago for the quilt shop, they discovered there were a lot of issues with that facade, and that kind of hindered some of the things. I know they had limited funds, and so I just was kind of surprised to see that being done, and we never saw it, and I felt like that front facade changed more than 50%. And I'm wondering if we should address that in the facade, because a lot of buildings on 12 Mile, we'd only be reviewing the front facade because that's all you see. In this case, because you had a full four-sided building, we didn't see it. And that front facade did change considerably. So I just wondered why that wasn't coming before us. So I'm wondering if maybe we should look at the wording of item number 1 too, as we get into reviewing ordinances in the future. So, not asking to do it now, but just, I think we need to look at that. Because I think this should say that it should be on the primary facade, so, or something like that.
Well, can I jump in on that?
Sure, go right ahead.
So that particular building, the side facade is even far more visible because it, it's such
Yeah,
a
the big
swath of a
parking
parking
lots.
lot.
Yep.
And you have the nursery or the plant
Mhm.
shop on the other side of it, so, and it sits far back from, it's just a little
Mhm.
further back from the road. So you have a really good
Right.
view onto the side of that building, so
Yeah.
that should be just as much counted as their
Yeah.
facade, baseline
Yeah, but
as the
again,
front, whereas the other buildings that are next to each other would only have the front to
Yeah.
be considered.
but most buildings in the downtown districts would be the front facade only.
And that's
So,
what they would be, that would be their
Right.
baseline to measure
Right.
from the 50%.
Yep,
So,
so,
Mr. Smith?
And I think that's what the ordinance is based on, is buildings that just have a one-side facade on the street. This actually has 3 facades. The east facade is
True.
quite exposed too.
Too.
Now, I don't know what they're doing there. We never saw the plans, and
right,
I'm
exactly.
sure it's wonderful and everything, but I think Mr. Murad has a good point that, this ordinance has always been written with the idea of a front facade in mind. We start going around the building, that's a lot more square footage. Now, we're not trying to create more work for ourselves, but that is our job. And, but of course, the staff, if they feel uncomfortable about something, that's what it says here, and that's what they do. They bring it before us.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but I think Mr. Murad has a very good point there when
Yep.
it's a 2-sided or 3-sided facade. We don't care about the back so much, but,
Should.
we do for
well, we
lighting.
should care about the back, actually, yeah.
Residents back
That's
there.
yeah, you're
Lighting,
absolutely
if
right.
they're putting in some sort of new lighting, we need
Yeah.
to look at it.
Yeah,
Well, they
yeah,
have to meet ordinance for that.
Yeah, I know, but.
right, but, you have a good point, and I don't know how to word that off
Well-
the top of my head.
Point of clarification,
Mr.
first, sub 1 has been in its original language, correct?
Yes, yes,
The only thing
yeah,
that's
we're not
changed is in
changing
the
it.
red.
And secondly, if other issues came up, it would kind of take the approval out of this
Correct.
administrative realm anyway, right? So, like lighting? I just want to make sure I understand.
But it does say facade singular.
Right.
Okay.
The impression is always the front facade.
Yeah.
But is that the only facade then? I'm not an architect, so I don't know what the boundary of it is.
Well,
I would think that the
buildings have-
entire exterior is the
Rectangular
facade.
buildings have 4 facades, but this says singular facade, and that was always the nature of the streetscape, the nature of the ordinance. Now, when we get a building on a corner, we have 2 or 3. If we have something going on behind it, we have 2. In this case, at least 3, maybe all 4. So I think, I'll say it again, you have a good point. Maybe it should be looked
Yeah.
at.
It's just something I want recorded that,
And they're not,
as we start updating the full ordinance book,
yeah,
as we start going through it, that we have to remember
absolutely.
to look at that.
Okay. Any comments from this end of the table?
We're new.
Okay, fair enough. Not all of you.
Do we beat that up enough?
All right, since we are not addressing item number 1 at this time, and we can always get the ordinance back for that particular purpose, we do have a motion on the floor. Are there any other comments? All right, Mr. McLean, can you please call the vote?
Richardson,
Yes.
Jadel,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Trotto,
Yes.
Kepner,
Yes.
Murad,
Yes.
Patterson,
Yes.
and Buckler.
Yes. All right. Okay, so we have a discussion on the master plan update. Mr. McLean, can you please introduce what we're looking at?
Yes, the time has come to update our master land use plan. That's going to be a lengthy endeavor. One of the items I wanted to bring to the Planning Commission's attention is the fact that the Downtown Development Authority has issued an RFP and has awarded a contract to draft a downtown master plan.
And who did they award it to?
A company from Chicago, Lakota Group. I was part of a task force that interviewed consulting firms rather. We had 3 firms respond to the RFP, 2 of which were granted interviews, and the Lakota Group really stood out. Very excited about the work they're going to hopefully do with the DDA in the city. This is important because a lot of the work that's going to be done in the downtown master plan are things that would typically be in your master land use plan. So I think the master land use plan and the downtown plan kind of need to work in concert. And one of the things we want to avoid, obviously, is duplication of efforts. I've also included the RFP for the downtown master plan and the proposal provided by the Lakota Group to give the Planning Commission an idea of the scope of work of that project.
Okay. So one of the things that I've talked to Mr. McLean about, and I've mentioned as I sat up here before, is this is not the only 2 things on our plate. And this is probably the most important, the master plan, because we do have a regulatory imperative to produce a new one or an updated one. However, on the list, along with the DDA design guidelines, we have redevelopment ready community, right? Could I say it correctly? Main Street program through Oakland County. We have complete streets, which have been handed to by the City Council, and we have a concerted effort, or we've been talking about for some time, modernizing our ordinances to better reflect how we do business in Berkeley and how we want to see Berkeley grow, and to, of course, support the master plan. So all these things have to work in harmony. So I was not in favor of having some of the, I wanted the entire meeting to be about this. We'll get to the side structure accessory discussion in a little bit. But I wanted to hear also from Mr. McLean, like, what resources, besides yourself, are we going to have available to us to help us through? So we have the planning consultant from DDA. Is there a planning consultant that's going to be retained by the city? Does the city have part-time planning help to get us through on some of the other things as they come up? Is there an RFP going for the planning consultant for master plan? And then how are we going to tackle the other items that need to be done?
Okay, trying to answer your questions one at a time. The city has budgeted for the master plan update. This fiscal year, there's $35,000, and then the next fiscal year, there's an additional $35,000. We had estimated that the plan would cost around $70,000. Hopefully, it won't cost that much. We will be issuing an RFP for consulting firms. So yes, the city will work with a planning consultant on the master plan update. I think
When will that RFP be issued?
well, I think before we issue the RFP, I think we need to have some type of joint meeting, work session, possibly with city council and perhaps the DDA on scope of work of the project. Yeah, before we can do an RFP, we need to have a scope of work for what we're going to do with the master plan.
Okay, so Mr. Gavin, you're over there as our representative from city council. Is that something that you guys will call for? I mean, we don't have the authority to call for that up here. I mean, so we have the ordinance that we act under, and we have limits to what we can do and can't do up here.
Well, I think certainly given the gravity of the task at hand, you know, we work with the city manager, city council to make sure that we can pull something like that together.
Okay. So, and what is the timeline for finalization of the master plan?
Well, I guess a lot of it depends on the scope of work. I think your average master plan can take, 6 months to a year to draft. I guess it depends on how comprehensive of an update the city wants to do with the master plan.
I think that's the first question that needs to be answered. How much of an update
What's
do we
the
want
scope,
to do?
yeah.
Yeah, what's the scope?
So I mean, I feel like we are a little bit chicken and egg up here, and we have been a little bit, and it's not a reflection on you, Tim, but I think until we have the scope defined by the powers that be, the elected powers that be, working with their staff, and resources to make a difference, I'm loath to spend any time on it at this point. We all have lots of ideas that we want to see in it, but we need that professionally facilitated, and we need somebody to draft kind of the guidance document, and also then prepare how the other programs are going to input into that process, where we're going to have to stop, where there's decision nodes that impact redevelopment ready, because that may drive some items that we have, and complete streets, that's going to drive some other issues that we have, and Main Street, that's going to drive some other issues, and that it coordinates with the DDA design guidelines. There's too many things up here for us, considering the powers vested to us. Now, I realize that, leadership is 20% granted and 80% taken, but that doesn't really apply when you have ordinances involved. So I'm happy to have a discussion. I think we should maybe go around the desk here and talk about some of our concerns. Marty, you were here, Mark, you were here, and Tim, you were here for the last process.
I came in at the very end.
And I was here during some of the updates.
I was not here.
Oh, you were
was
not
not
here
here,
in
no.
2007? Oh, I'm so
No.
sorry.
Marty's the only one left.
Okay. So we can talk, what we were all,
The old guy.
so Ann and the gentleman down on this side were here for the amendment process, but we want to make sure that there's, adequate input sessions, controlled chaos for this process, because it is a regulatory required process. This is not something we would be undertaking on a whim. There are requirements for what the master plan needs to include, and of course then there's a finite budget for the consulting fees. And while you hope it doesn't cost that much, I think that will get eaten rather quickly. Fees are
I'm
fees.
inclined to agree, unfortunately. One of the things I also was looking at is prior to 2007, the last time the city had undertaken a comprehensive master plan update was 1989. I had a very hard time getting my hands on the master plan from 1989. Commissioner Smith happened to have a copy that he's provided to me.
It's good reading, too.
Marty, can you answer why there was it was just updates in between there, or you felt you were
I don't.
happy? You
I
weren't
started in
tired?
99 or 2000, so when I started, we were just beginning the process for the 2007.
Right.
So I don't know why,
7 years?
well, maybe it's 2005, I don't remember the year. But we were just beginning the process.
Retired.
So, so I don't know what happened prior to that, why it took that long, so.
Okay.
And if I recall, I came in during the middle of it, so I think it took a couple of years.
Right.
Because, I mean, it
Oh,
had to
it
be
did.
totally rewritten.
Yeah. Now, we have an advantage here, should this downtown master plan go. As that proceeds, that's a big chunk. Now, we'll all, of course, want to have some input on that, because we stick our noses and things like that. But that helps a lot, because I remember, if you look at the 89 document, and I would recommend everybody to at least shuffle through it. It's a very boring document. It's colored dots
Bless
all
you.
over it. Basically, bless you, basically highlights all the problems in Berkeley, like most master plans were at that time. We took kind of a small quantum leap with the last master plan, and we came up, everybody brainstormed and came back with some ideas. And we had 5, what did we call them?
Catalytic
projects.
Yeah.
And it was a total change of how to approach a master plan, and we weren't the first ones to do it. What we're doing now is yet again another giant leap.
Yeah.
So
So it has to be determined. What's the scope? Do we want
Yeah.
to start from scratch again, or do we want to just update what's there?
yeah. Well, I think a lot of the ideas are still there.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's a lot of information in the proposed downtown master plan that helps, or will help, or could help. And that helps us a lot with our master plan. So that leaves us with the perimeter roads and residential and so on.
So, question, and Vivian, you might want to come to the microphone and answer this as the DDA director. Does your design guidelines go through any type of public notice process?
So the design guidelines, as you know, we made that presentation, that joint presentation to Planning Commission and to the council. So we are now in the process of moving those through the adoption process, so they will become adopted as part of the codes and ordinances with a design review board. So that design review board, we're actually meeting with John and Tim and Matt next week to kind of review ordinance language and just the scope of what that board, its authority would be, how it would interact with planning, how it would facilitate the process. Case in point, you talk about major facades, that would be going to the design review board with a recommendation then either to administration
downtown area.
or to you guys for approval. So all of those types of major facade improvements, all of that stuff then would go through the design review board. Now, the master plan update moves to the next step where we actually do look at then land use and obviously the parking study update. So it's much more comprehensive as a downtown portion of your master plan. Obviously relying on some of the groundwork that's been laid through those design guidelines. That contract will be approved in August at the DDA's board meeting, so we expect that process will start pretty quickly. One of the things we liked about Lakota was a very, very robust public input and participation component, because we do feel, as we felt in everything we've done, that that's a critical component. So we expect to see that process start, probably get kicked off with some early meetings in August, and then with some public participation and some of that initial groundwork being laid in September, with ideally the process finishing up in May or June of next year.
Okay.
And I would hope, and Tim and I have been talking frequently, is that, then if the city then hires whatever firm, then, there can be some overlap.
Sure.
So that there is, some communications between those two firms as we move forward too. So there's not a disjointed approach, but that we have, a like mind and everybody's kind of on the same page.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for talking on the spot like that. Okay, so, is there any comments from this end of?
I was looking through, and I think it was Commissioner Kaplansky last time we were talking about this, she pointed out the Ferndale Master Plan. So I did go and look at that. They say it took them about 1.5 years to do it. And it does look modern. It's appealing to read. It's easy to read. It's easy to find your information. You know, this is, so like if I was on 11 Mile, I'd have to search through, you know, a bunch of different land uses to figure out, you know, what's allowable on 11 Mile. I think ours could use a lot of tightening up, but a lot of the information that's in it isn't going to change a whole lot because we're not big enough to change a whole lot. But it probably needs to be rewritten and prettied up.
I was just going to say, yeah, I don't think, and when you start talking scope, I don't think we're looking for wholesale change. You know, just tweaking, and there's some things that, you know, we've talked about in the past, some well into the past, but we're not looking for a wholesale change of the town. A lot of communities do, and I haven't worked with the Ferndale. I know Troy did a whole revamp. And other communities do.
Much bigger community.
Yeah, they are.
And I'm not personally looking for anything in particular. I have no preconceived notion of what it should or shouldn't be. I think the process will guide us that, and
Yep.
we'll have, you know, proper facilitation. So, that being said, I throw it over to Mr. Gavin to bring it to your brethren at City Council to provide the guidance and the resources so that we can kick off this process.
Thank you.
Okay? All right. Any other last-minute comments on that?
Could I ask Ms. Carmody a couple
Sure.
questions?
By all means, Ms. Carmody.
Or,
Call me Vivian.
well,
I know,
You know.
I know. I just seldom
or-
even recognize that.
Tim might even be able to answer this, but is it your anticipation that the guidelines are going to be enacted
Soon.
into the ordinance intact?
No.
Literally?
No, you mean,
or
so
not?
the complete design guidelines would be adopted as part of the ordinance?
Yeah,
Wait,
what's
so
your
that
approach?
language, no. No, no, I would not want to see the entire design guidelines language integrated into the ordinance. I think that's cumbersome.
Okay.
What we're looking at is just that design review board that then refers to those design guidelines. So the ordinance actually creates that design review board, and then there's ordinance language that speaks to the responsibilities of that board. But the design guidelines themselves are a standalone document that's referred to by that design review board, and it's not that language itself isn't totally adopted. You see it both ways. If you go and if you look actually at Ann Arbor and the way they've done it, I really like the process they've taken, where you just go out and search, and you'll see on their website, it literally just talks about, you know, the scope of what this is, what the design guidelines are for. You can link to them, but the ordinance language speaks specifically to just referring to those in this design review board.
My second question has to do with the board. How much latitude or discretion is the board going to have in your
Well, ultimately, it still comes up to Planning Commission. So they make recommendations. They don't make, they would review. So the way we currently have it set up is that, you know, the applicant comes in, and they would have a fairly complete design, site plan, depending on the scope of the project. Obviously, it's different if it's a facade or whether it's a new development. And the design review board would have up to 2 reviews, and then they would make recommendations to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission still has the final authority. That's your role. That's your job.
Okay,
So
thanks.
it's not trying to supersede. What it's trying to do is facilitate and take away maybe some of that, you know, the having to look at every single design and, you know, here's a board, and then they refer, and then they recommend it up to you, but it's still up to you guys in the end to say, yes, we stamp.
So I'm envisioning a body that kind of works with the renovator or the developer to
Yeah.
come to some sort of agreement on you know, design materials, things of that sort.
Yeah, and remember also that for the DDA, we have our facade grants, and we have, you know, now that we're with Main Street, we have architectural services through Oakland County that we can offer property owners for free. So a lot of times, you'll see, for instance, coming up, you know, Spike Lawrence is doing is about to start a major facade renovation that the architectural drawings were created by the historic preservation architect who works at Main Street, Oakland County, for Oakland County. So you know by the time that comes to either you or to Tim or to a design review board, everything about that is going to fit well within what is appropriate, because it's been done with that thoughtful process behind it. So with the facade grant, where you have to go through DDA review to get your facade grant funds, you know, with the way the design review board is set up, with the communications between the DDA and the city, and then with it turning over, you know, moving along that process to the Planning Commission, I mean, it should be, by the time it gets to Planning Commission, there shouldn't be many questions, and it should be pretty nailed as to whether or not it's appropriate, you know, within this district. So that's the goal.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other discussion? Questions, comments? The public comment session, I guess, we can do
Yeah.
that? What's discussion? Come on up.
Just having discussion.
Hi, Wendy Zabramski, Berkeley. On the scope of that, I have a question as far as, and I know this is, you're just doing this processing. So if there's a design review board, what if there was a PUD proposed? Does that come to you? Does that go through her? Curious, that's all. No, I'm your board.
It
I
depends
just
on-
meant,
Well,
I just meant,
So it would, so the, I think to answer it very simply is the DDA design board is there to kind of set forth the, a funnel for the projects in the downtown development area, or in the downtown areas. And if there's a PUD, the design of the building is only one element of the PUD and the site plan. So I don't want to say it has no teeth, the design board, but it is meant to be kind of a guidance, you know, a place where it goes for conformity to the vision of the downtown. It is not ordinance. It is not law per se, and we can, I mean, there are things that we could do that we would typically not undermine them, but a PUD is different, and a PUD is special in all sorts of ways, and they would have no authority to vote on the PUD or not. They certainly would if there was a building involved in the planned unit development that was in the downtown area. It would have to meet, or it should meet the design guidelines that are set forth for facades and glazing and
New development, building height, scale,
All that.
quality of materials, and all
Yeah,
that stuff.
exactly.
It's important to note that it's not a DDA design review board, it's a city design review
Yes, yes,
board.
sorry, yes.
Okay, so, I mean, it would be unlikely, I mean, there would be experts who sit on this, people who have planning expertise, people who have, you know, construction expertise, people who have landscape, engineering expertise. So it's a well-rounded board. It's important, though, that it's not a DDA board. I just want to
Sorry.
clarify that.
I apologize
That
for
it is, yeah, I just you know, I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
nobody thinks the DDA is trying to take over. Because we're not.
Okay.
Just the downtown.
Just the downtown. Okay, very good. Are there any other comments?
Just one, Madam Chair. I will scan the 1989 master plan, and I will get that out to the commission.
Sure. Sure. Fun reading. All right, we're going to move on to the,
So I guess I'm curious.
Amen, city, please.
Annalise Petras, I live on Franklin and Berkeley. I guess I'm curious whether the downtown master plan that's proposed, you know, to me, that seems like it's defined by the boundary of the overlay of the district, the DDA's
Correct.
district.
That's correct.
So maybe there's a possibility to just add on to and do everything outside of the district and do the process together. Because I'm concerned that people will make a lot of comments during this first participation process. There's going to be, I mean, when I read through the plan, it's great. There's all these outreach Pinterest boards, and it's like, it seems like it would be too divided to have all these comments once and then go and do it all again. And a lot of the land use is, you know, should be working together, that you have multifamily in the downtown as well as outside of it. So I think that's could be one possibility, and compress the process. And maybe we can get these two to work together, even with the same group.
Well, quite frankly, the idea is that we all do work together. This is not going to be one, that's why we need to tether them all together. But there are efforts that are taking place, and there are authorities that have put things on our plate, and they do all have to work together, just like Complete Streets. City Council passed Complete Streets. I think there was public input on that decision, and we are now tasked with envisioning and executing what that will be for the city. That has to take place also in harmony with the master plan. We fully intend that we will work in harmony with the DDA. Our DDA probably wasn't this robust 10 years ago or 15 years ago or whenever we did the last master plan. So, and there's a lot more kind of innovative things. There's also a drive back to downtowns that really didn't exist 15, 20 years ago, so when we started the last process. So there's some things to look at, but we do fully intend on doing this together. But there is a kind of a requirement in the Michigan statutes for us to go through the master planning process. The DDA will dovetail in with that. We, of course, would rather they do the work on that, because that saves, of course, staff and city time for areas outside of the DDA, which are two very important strips that we have, but we still have a lot of real estate not covered by it. So they will dovetail in together.
So are you explaining two participation plans?
Well, the DDA will have its participation plan, but it's, and I'm not sure, you know, Vivian, you can talk to that, but as far as like I don't know if it has to have public hearings per se to approve it. It's not a regulatory, and I'm not an attorney, and probably John can speak to this better, Mr. Sharon can speak to this better, as far as like what the regulatory imperatives are, but we have that for the master plan. It's, I think, in all our best interest that we have a exuberant and well resourced group that will take a piece of that and work on it, but anything that gets approved in that DDA process has to be ultimately approved through the master plan process. And if there's conflict that comes up through that, we'll send it back to the drawing board. However, the idea is that they're having input sessions on very small, specific, micro sections, if you will, for lack of a better term. I think that's actually a good thing, because you get that input on some, because it's a little bit more complicated. So I think that's the best I can explain it with my limited vocabulary.
Yeah, and at the end of the process, it'll be, you know, the Lakota group will come and they'll do a presentation to Planning Commission, they'll do the presentation to City Council, and eventually this will get adopted as the downtown's portion of the master plan. What we're doing is we're just taking that part of it and completing it for you. Yep. Because to your point, it's a lot more, the district is more vibrant. There's just a lot of things that are different than they were 15 years or 12 or even 8 years ago. So, but yes, we expect that it will then become adopted as part of the master plan, but until the master plan is completed, then, you know, it'll sit there out there as kind of our guiding strategic plan.
Very good. Thank you.
I guess my concern with it is that comments will be happening in the DDA's realm and not be getting to the rest of Planning Commission, and that the issue with the DDA's endeavors is that they have a boundary. So how a lot of what will come out of that process, bleeds onto 11 Mile and Woodward, and those areas I would like for us to take as much effort on and have public participation in.
Of course we're
So
going to have that.
are there two separate things, or are they together?
Well, let's just
So-
say this is a subset of the major effort.
Right.
So there are a little bit different moving parts in the downtown, so having that as a separate effort, frankly, I look at that as a plus versus a minus, and we, instead of having all one encompassing, but it will end up being part of our master plan, so if you didn't get your bite at the apple during the DDA process, you'll have a second bite at it during the master plan, adoption process, and then, of course, the, issues of, and how we break up the master plan, that'll be partially up to what our scope is and who our facilitating consultant will be on how we decide to do that, whether they break up, the business districts into a discussion for a public hearing, whether they break up residential. I don't know what that's gonna look like yet. It hasn't been framed out, but there will be plenty of opportunity, and I think that, I think if anything, on the DDA stuff, you'll have more bites at the apple with that than you will the others, so.
Gotcha. So is one avenue then to do it similar to how Birmingham did it, where their downtown is an overlay district? And that way
Can't answer
it
that.
does get codified?
So I think that'll all come out as part of this process, whether we look at parts of the downtown having overlay districts. I mean, the DDA district isn't going to change, and so what we're focusing on is just the issues that are specific to the DDA district. If there are potentials for overlay districts, that make sense for some reason or another, then that will all of that land use and will come out as part of the process, and hopefully, with a robust and active public participation process, meaning residents as well as business owners, that will become clear. Right now, it's a wide open slate, because I'll be honest, the last master plan spoke not very thoroughly about the downtown.
Right.
So this, to me, this portion of the master plan is critical because it wasn't addressed very in-depth last time around.
Gotcha.
So I think a lot of those questions will be answered throughout the process, but I'm kind of eager to see what comes of it, because who knows,
Right.
But there are
But-
things. I mean, we've talked about, different kinds of overlay districts, whether it's kind
Closer
of
to
a
the
limited
microphone,
retail or
Vivian, it's a little
whatever,
hard.
so, yeah.
Okay, all right. Any other comments?
Okay, this is what, I want to clarify my thinking here.
Name it again, please.
Wendy Zabramski.
Thank you.
I live actually on Gardner Avenue, too. Vivian did say that as her process for the design review board, that they could come back to them twice, and then it would come to you, and that it would be pretty much done, a yes or a no. That's what I got. That's why my concern about, say, a PUD. Okay, my other concern is adding a design review board, is that adding another layer of authority to us? And one more thing I want to say with thinking all this. What about the citizens attending planning meetings, okay? Does that mean for the citizens to be involved, they've got to attend a DDA planning meeting and the city planning meeting?
So I think I can answer this simply in that the DDA would be a wider funnel.
Okay.
Some cities have very robust staff that the developer can go and work with, so that by the time it reaches this desk, it is administratively complete, it is technically complete, and we are now going through questions of like appropriateness for the community, and there might be some tweaks or whatnot, but there isn't a question of whether or not it's, you know, it has all of its parking spaces, and does it have its this or that. We don't have quite those resources in Berkeley, so the Planning Commission has kind of filled in that role. However, you could have a developer who has a crackerjack team and knows the ordinances really well and doesn't need city staff. Not everybody has those kind of resources at them. So the DDA is not usurping any of our authority nor the citizens' rights to comment on the work. And there is no PUD that can be done or blessed by their group. Period. It's not the way the ordinance is written. So I do encourage everybody to pull the ordinances out, read them well, and understand that this is, let's call it a secondary resource to the community that will help guide the downtown district. It does not approve or deny any of these site plans. It does not have that authority. What it has the authority to do, and authority is probably the wrong word, what it has the duty, I guess is a better word to do, is that it is to ensure that whatever is being proposed meets the DDA's guidelines for design, for whatever, and whatever those might be. Now, all of those buildings have to meet ordinance. They all have to meet code, and they all still have to come, unless it's a simple facade change, which is administrative, but even then, they'd probably go through review guidelines and then go to the city for the permit. But if it has to come to this board, it still comes to this board. What it does is alleviate us from having to be architects and civil engineers, even though some of us are those things. It allows us then to focus on community need, getting community input on it. We don't become the design engineer for the project. So I think it is a tremendous resource. It does not in any way, shape, or form take away the citizens' rights for comments, and there is no PUD that can get approved by it. So I want to make that very clear to the audience out there, because there's more people that are sitting in the chairs. It does not change the authority of this commission in any way, shape, or form. And we can deny it if we want to, regardless of all the hoop jumping they did through the process.
Okay, but it still means that residents, to be involved, would have to be attending the different meetings.
Well, Wendy, you can be involved in whatever, Ms. Zambransky, you can be
Let
involved
me-
in whatever
Let me add,
thing.
what I'm thinking, though, to it is that, for instance, let's give an example. Let's say the facade change was a whole different thing at Tootie and Tula's. Let's say, you know, they're building a new building next to it. Okay, so if it's going, and again, that would probably come here, but when they're going through design review, what about the public hearings for the 100 feet within?
Okay,
That's, this is what I'm thinking.
that still happens.
Okay.
That doesn't change, and I think I'm now repeating myself for the fourth time when I say that. None of that changes. All that happens is there's a preliminary step that whatever the developer chooses to do with his or her property within the downtown district, it will meet the guidelines that they've set forth. Now, it still has to come. Now, that's like an extra added little benefit of some additional resources that they could go hire on their own, quite frankly. But sometimes it's like they don't have those kinds of resources and they're not exactly sure what's going to fit in Berkeley, so this is a funnel. The public would normally not be involved in that process anyways. That's private design time. They're just doing it to make sure it meets the downtown, and it still comes to us in a form where it should come to us, which is, it is fully fleshed out, it is design worthy, it is
meets the
concept
guidelines.
plans, that's right. It meets our ordinance requirements for site plan review, and when we have it, then it is public input. If it requires that public, you know, it always require public input at some point because it's gonna be on our agenda. But whether it not needs a public hearing, well, that's for a modification or a PUD or an ordinance or a zoning change. So most site plan reviews merely get public input during the session. We take that and then we make our decision. So this does not change any of that, but the public is generally not involved at the preliminary design process for a project. That is the owner's right to design up his project.
I'm sorry, Michelle, but the public does have this is all change and we do have a right to understand the process.
You do, I'm saying you have a
Okay.
right to understand the process, but I'm saying
But
I'm saying the owner has a right to design, to do his site plan development project, and then bring it to us. We generally don't have input except when it gets submitted to us. We
Okay.
don't sit with them. Now, there were some differences on last lead and PUDs, and that does happen where they come to us and they have an idea and they're trying to flesh it out and they want to work with the public. But there is a great many developers who go out there, completely flesh out their idea, completely design it, and drop it in a city's desk. I'm not saying that's successful or not successful, but that's their right to do that.
I understand, but I hope you can understand my questioning.
I understand your
considering
questions,
the
but
change.
it does not change the public input
Okay.
process in any way, shape, or form.
Well, but Vivian did say, by the time it gets to you, it's just for a yes and no, and I'm thinking
No,
public.
that's not correct. That's not
I
correct.
don't think that's what she
said
said, nor
it's
what she
ready for
meant.
you
Let's
at
just say it's at a point that it is technically more complete than what we've seen in the past. And we will appreciate that because it will be less time up here for us to gnash about it. And, I mean, the commissioners spend a great deal of time going over these plans, as you well know. And so if we know that now it's already been reviewed for X, Y, or Z, it's a little bit like, okay, we can rely on some of that coming in, but it does not stop the public input process.
Can I think if maybe this helps, it's still going to be presented to us like anything else would be presented to us. It's just already kind of been proofread by somebody else.
Well, if I could chime in, we need to stress that we have legal responsibilities here to approve plans and to afford the public the opportunity to comment. And nothing about this process can change those legal requirements.
Right.
Those are set by state law. So we're essentially making maybe the process a little more formal and adding some steps to it, but we're not changing anybody's legal responsibilities, and we're certainly not changing any legal rights. We have absolutely no authority to change any of that.
That's right.
You know,
Okay. Any other comments? All right, we're going to move on. Let's do the ordinance amendment. Item number 4, ordinance amendment, Chapter 138, Article 3, Division 1, accessory buildings and structures, with an attachment of a draft ordinance for exterior appliances. I vaguely remember talking about this a million years ago, about a year ago, I think, or a little more than a year ago. June. So, Mr. McLean, you can speak to this, but if I recall, this is really about generators in yards.
Yes, the Zoning Board of Appeals has heard a number of cases in previous years regarding the placement of generators. Most recently, first part of the month, the ZBA heard a case for a resident who wanted to install a generator in a side yard. Our ordinance doesn't address generators specifically, so the ZBA was kind of left picking up the pieces as to, you know, what is it? Is it an accessory structure? And they have opined that generator does fall under the category of an accessory structure. Rather than having to keep hearing these cases, they had asked for an ordinance to be created that addresses this specifically. My predecessor had begun crafting an ordinance. Looks like it was last discussed by the Planning Commission at the July meeting of last year.
Here, see, I'm not that
So
senile.
I think with the departure of Ms. Vanson and as much as the La Salette project has occupied the agenda for the Planning Commission, this had been relegated to the back burner. However, having just come up with ZBA, they have asked that this get addressed.
Okie dokie. So, I recall we had more than one meeting on this topic.
Yes, we did.
So, for the newbies our new gentlemen newbies, effectively, we're talking about permanent generators, because those seem to be the latest must-have for the modern homeowner. And I think I brought up the portable generators, and Mr. Dean Smith told me I was being draconian, if I recall, including them in there too. So we have air conditioners, we have power generators, and then I'm not sure the exterior appliance, why we need a,
For vent fans, I don't think
no,
we
I
need
don't
to
know why we
address
need a
that.
secondary, like, everything could be an exterior appliance. Do we have to define central air conditioning, condenser unit, emergency power generation? Okay, so let's talk about the ordinance. Let's start in a kind of a fashion. Raise your hand if you want to, or let me know, Mr. Muron.
I'll go first, too. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. I don't think these belong in the side yard for any reason. And
Okay.
actually, a generator, it doesn't have to be close to the house. It can be put, you know, so then it looks to me more like, you know, because here we have required setback, but also we need to have a setback from like your rear property line, because if you have a detached garage, you could put in 10 feet of space between your detached garage and your rear property line. You could tuck it back there and just, I mean, it's a little bit more expensive to run the electrical, but that's where it is. Yeah, I know that, but I'm just saying, you know, it can be located at, the house, there's a reason why they put the air conditioner so close, but the generator can be placed anywhere, really, so.
I think to kind of, not to stifle discussion, but I want to avoid having to completely rehash this over, you know, 2 more meetings, is, I think the salient question comes down to side yard or backyard.
I think it has to
And-
be in the backyard.
And I actually hear from Mr. Trotto, who puts
Well,
these, or.
First
has
question
put
comes
these
to
in
mind
for-
if you're on like a double wide lot. Could you get that opportunity there? I mean, there almost should be like a distance away from the generator. Additionally, when you are dealing with generators, there's always clearances that are required for them for air movement, intake, and exhaust. Every generator I've always installed has some sort of a 5-foot clearance, 3-foot clearance, and there's always the NEC code clearances, which are, you know, minimum 36 inches. So you run into those items that you have to deal with anyways. Most side yards, looking at the newer houses built these days, you don't have the clearances necessary even to put it in. You'll be encroaching on your neighbor's lot. So most side yards aren't going to comply to it anyways. So you're
Agreed.
pretty much forced to put it either someplace behind your house or behind your garage.
Right, but this ordinance is also going to be addressing like a heat pump or an air conditioning unit.
Well, I know that the ordinance for the air conditioning units are pretty much, if you have somebody sign off on it, your neighbor, they'll let it go.
Correct, and I'm somebody that inherited a previous homeowner that signed off on it, and I have to deal with it, and I don't have air conditioning. So
Okay.
I hear their AC unit drone on, so,
See your point? Can't deny it.
yeah, so,
And my neighbors have it also, and I agreed to it because I'm the same person. I have the same
Right.
scenario. I did it
Right.
on my side yard. As for the generator, though, you're 100% correct. You could easily locate it behind the house. The
Yep.
biggest expense, actually, the electrical isn't the biggest expense. The biggest expense is usually the excavation. So.
correct.
Madam Chair,
Sir.
the case that the zoning board heard most recently, the applicant would have been unable to place the generator in the backyard due to flooding issues. That was why they were
Due to
seeking
what?
flooding issues.
Pop it up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's why they had
That
requested.
doesn't sound like a hardship to me. You know, he's built
I
it up.
think they approved it, though. if
Really?
I
They did,
recall.
the zoning board did determine that with the flooding, there was a practical difficulty.
Okay.
Marty, do you have any other comments you'd like to make on this?
Well, I agree with Mr. Murad. I mean, you know, there's something else seeing in here. We talked about 65 decibels.
Yeah.
And in Mr. Murad's case and everyone else's in town, if you don't happen to have air conditioning, or you choose not to use it and your neighbor's using it, 65 decibels is a lot of noise at night when you're trying to sleep. And I copied a bunch of noise level charts. 60 decibels is conversational speech. Now, if you're trying to sleep and 3 feet from your property line, your neighbors are gabbing away when you're trying to sleep, that's pretty dang annoying. You know, business office,
Welcome to my neighborhood.
yeah, I know. Vacuum cleaner at 3 feet is 70 decibels, we're talking 65, that's a little louder. Conversation speech, 60 decibels. Air conditioning unit at 100 feet, 60 decibels. So it's not it's not an absence of sound. If you're trying to sleep or you have kids trying to sleep, sewing machine, hair dryer, alarm clock, I mean, all kinds of things are at 60 to 70 decibels. So I agree with Ms. Murad. There's an exception on larger lots, maybe, but I don't think they belong, and I don't think air conditioners belong in side yards because unless there's a compelling reason. And the fact that your yard floods, I don't believe is a compelling reason you can build it up. But that's not my, I wasn't there.
Madam Chair, I don't necessarily have an issue with the side yard, given the circumstance. So I guess my question would be, can we not include that with the proper setbacks for the proper, say, double lot or whatnot, with the proper shielding, fences, landscaping, or whatnot? That might eliminate 80% of the city, but that allows whatever percentage
We lower the decibel
may
level.
allow.
No,
No?
I don't
May I-
think so.
Yeah, I mean, another option you have is decibel levels. There is many different criteria for generators. I have stood next to a generator, you don't even know it's running, whereas I've stood next to them and you can feel it vibrating the ground 20 feet away. So depending on the size of the generator and the quality of the build, I mean, I could put a generator next to you right now, you wouldn't even know it's running.
So could we have two standards? We could have a side yard or distance standard. If it's X number of feet, this is your decibel level, and if it's
That's what
X
most
number of
communities
feet, you
do.
could do a higher decibel level that gives, so they can buy a less expensive or noisier unit. But, I mean, so I'm thinking of, well, so my house, my air conditioner is technically behind the house, but it's 3 feet from the neighbor's property line, because it's a 40-foot lot. Well,
Right.
it's 39 and a half, but,
Right.
so there's really,
Tight lot.
so, yes, there's a bunch of them in a row. So
Yeah.
it's no different whether it's side or back, because it's in the back corner of my house, so it's might as well, it's closer than most. And that's how they all are on our little grouping. I mean, I think almost all but one has air.
But again, it's at the back corner where mine, it's right in the middle, and you've got the sound just bouncing off the two houses.
Yeah, when it's on the side of a house, the sound is bouncing off that house, coming
Right.
at yours. When it's in the back, it's spreading out,
Right.
and the pressure waves do spread out.
Sure, so maybe it needs some kind of thing around
Screening.
it or something, screening
Would have
and,
been perfect, but.
so, I think, I think again, I big proponent of property should be able to be developed that don't infringe on your neighbors, but also that are your ability as an owner to do what you think is best on
Now, if we had
your lot.
100-foot wide lots all over the city, yeah, then, and it, but we don't.
So I'd like to see I'd like to see a dual noise level requirement and distance related to that gives people flexibility. So if you want it in your side lot, it has to be a decibel of 45 or 50 or something like that.
Let me
Which is
ask
low.
Matt this, so we've had 2 or 3 of these come before the ZBA, but how many other people have installed them with just coming to get a permit? Do we know?
I can find out.
Are they even
Let's
getting
find
a
that out.
permit?
For rear yards, yes. For side, obviously, you'd have to get a variance.
Because if this is like 1% or 2% of the people that have had them installed,
I know in the last, 2 years, I believe there's been 4 cases before, at least 4 cases before the ZBA on these for side yards.
now if it's only been 12 people have had them installed and we've had this, then it's a big problem. But I'd like to know that.
I think they granted the variance in all of them, if I recall.
I believe they did.
I have a question. I don't know if you know this. So, in thinking of the dual noise level, 10 or 15 years down the road, what is it, as these machines age, are they likely to get more noisy?
No, they don't tend to get more noisy than I've seen. Usually they don't run all that often, except for in emergency situations.
I think the majority of these would be natural gas as well. I mean,
Well,
I
these
can't
would all be
imagine-
natural gas.
I can't imagine you putting a diesel.
And if it was an air conditioner? I mean, because we're looking at this as a whole
Yeah.
exterior, either or.
Well, air conditioners fail all the time.
Do they get noisier before
Yes,
they die?
Oh,
they
yeah.
can, if the fan
So,
seizes or,
something that might get
starts
installed when
going
it was
on the fan.
quiet 10 years down the line might be a big problem for the neighbor.
Absolutely. If you-
They have to meet the decibel levels. I mean, if they put it in, it has to meet the decibel levels, and if it fails to do so, then they're violating the ordinance. It's that simple. Just because they put it in at a certain decibel level, they have to maintain it. So they can't just let it get louder and louder and louder. They're in violation of the ordinance at that point, and you can make a complaint. And we have a code enforcement Facebook page, if I remember correctly, that help us with that. So that's code.
One more thing that might compound the problem is, I know in a lot of cities, they create a ordinance that will make it for an industrial area, a certain noise level is acceptable when it's not adjacent to a residential. And if they're in a residential area, it's a different standard.
I don't think we have
We don't
anything that's not
have that very
adjacent.
often here, but, I mean, there will be areas where you could have a couple hundred feet between there and your nearest residential, and it may impact it.
I don't know if we actually have any. Do we have
Well,
any
we have a lot of commercial
properties?
abutting residential, and they can have units too.
Right.
And, you know, we've had a couple,
Grocery stores are a great example of that.
yes, they are,
Restaurants with coolers.
restaurants, and people talking late at night. You know, that's been an issue in a lot of projects we've, over the years, looked at.
Right.
The residents don't want a adult beverage establishment because it can be, so it's the same thing. So it's a matter of distance and a matter of impact. Mr. McLean, I'll pass this around if you want these. It's just different lists of decibels and what they represent. Everybody look at it if you want, just for whatever.
I seem to recall that we looked at some
We-
other
we did
neighboring
look at a
communities'
list of,
ordinances, and but we also looked at
decibels.
neighboring community ordinances with
Yeah.
what they're doing with this, these small lots.
One other thing that does pop up is also in times of emergency, there's usually a clause that lets it slide. So if you have something that comes up where you have a long-term power outage, they'll allow that to be louder than the normal, as you
Yeah.
can say, 65 dB. Most of them are 75 or even 85 dB.
Well, it's
And
the
if you're
portable ones.
and if you're feeding your neighbors, they'll be happy to let you make a little
Oh, sure.
noise. Yeah.
What do you do about the, and I, again, bring up, what about the portable ones?
Oh, mine sounds like a wounded freight train, so.
My neighbors liked me too, so.
Just go find a hotel.
You just let your neighbors run an extension
So
off
what
of
is
yours,
the,
right?
what is the will of the commission, so we don't continue to drag this dead cat?
I think we need to drag the cat because I think it needs some some more
All
thought.
right,
Yeah.
so we're sending it back to you, Mr. McLean, with some requirements for, do we want to see dual decibel levels and a requirement in there that the owners must maintain that?
I guess I'd like to see what that language looks like, but I'm not sold on the idea.
Okay.
I also have a question. I don't know if I'm reading this right, but the draft here suggests a setback of, could be reading this wrong, 3 feet from a single family, 2 feet from a residence other than a single family,
Garage.
non-residential 2 feet.
Multifamily.
Why 2 feet for a multifamily instead of, and 3 feet for a detached? What's the rationale for the difference? If I'm reading that right?
Now that we have somebody that installs them, I think he can help guide us there.
It comes
too.
down to the clearances required by the manufacturer.
Okay.
If you purchase one that can be pushed up against the wall, then legally it can be pushed up against the wall. As long as it has the proper clearances around it for NEC code and air movement, it won't have any problems.
Well, this is exterior appliance shell here to the following minimum setbacks.
These are
from a budding
setbacks
property.
from a budding property.
So, from a single-family detached residence, 3 feet, I don't think that's gonna work. But you're right, it says residence other than single-family would be multifamily.
I mean, maybe there is a rationale, I just don't know what it is.
I wouldn't, is your neighbors 3 feet off your property line, or from your house?
No,
Like, I
it's
was gonna
further
say,
than
you
that.
can't- Yeah, you can't put it 3 feet from your neighbor's house.
No.
That's what it says.
I think this must be, I would think that for something that is missing from this,
Well, that's from the
that it was
property line.
from the property line that it contains.
So this is saying from the abutting property line.
From the property line
Right.
of a
So it
property
would
that
have to be
contains a
3 feet-
single-family detached.
3 feet or potentially 2 feet from the neighbor's property line.
Right, but as Mr. Trotto said, 80, whatever, 90% of our residences, it's a no-win as it is, because
Right.
buildings are built to the 5 and 10 feet already, and the 10
Right.
feet's usually the driveway. So,
Correct.
so, these are very difficult to
Put
drive,
it in the side yard.
put in the side yard. yeah.
And also, I encourage you to look, again, at some of the neighboring communities that are similar in nature to Berkeley, smaller lots, older communities. and see what they've proposed, because we can't be the only people struggling with that. And see what the public comments were on that as well, some of the input was.
And obviously, we have not had a public hearing on this
No,
either.
this is not,
so-
this is not a
Yeah.
public hearing, this is,
Yeah.
we are trying to get to language that we could get to some point.
Right.
But it does need to be addressed, but I don't think we're ripe to do anything with sending it back for kind of a
No.
final at this point.
It was a
All right.
discussion item, so.
Any other comments? All right, we'll go to elections. So, the matter of electing a chairperson, vice chair, and secretary to the planning commission. Yay, as I've made it very clear to several people here, I no longer wish to be chair, so I do not have the bandwidth nor the time that is necessary to guide the process needed for the master plan, the DDA design guidelines, the redevelopment ready, the complete streets, the main street, and the ordinance renewals. I do not have the time. And I don't necessarily have the skills, more importantly. I'm a citizen planner, I am an engineer by trade, and I have a good history and experience, but I think there needs to be somebody sitting in this spot who understands these programs fundamentally and understands how they all work together to help us move this process forward. So we will take nominations.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
not to steal the thunder of any of the commissioners who are interested in being the chair, I've spoken with Commissioner Kapelansky, and she has indicated that she would be interested in being the chair if that's the wishes of the Planning Commission. And I have some written correspondence from her indicating as such if anybody would like to see it. But obviously, I don't want to steal anybody's thunder who's
That's okay.
interested in the
Well,
chair. Just
I
throwing
guess-
that out there.
Then I would nominate Ms. Kapelansky as the chair. Do I have support?
Well, Ms. Chairman, is there anybody else
Yeah,
who wants
no,
to
I mean,
be?
I think we throw one nomination out, and then we see if anybody else nominates anybody else. Everybody has a voice.
I don't see anybody rushing to the microphone.
I need support for a nomination of chair.
I will support that.
All right, is there any other nominations for chair? All right, should we take the vote?
Sure.
Madam Chair, do we need to do the vice chair and secretary all in one shot, or can we do
I
that
think we do them as
separately?
individual elections, if I recall,
Okay.
because in case we have people competing for secretary. It's a juicy job, so
Treasurer-
there's a lot of
treasurer.
people.
No, there's no
So
treasurer.
let's take the roll one at a time.
Who was the
Miss-
support?
Mr. Smith.
Smith.
God, thank you.
Wait,
And I think she'd be excellent because she is a professional planner.
Yeah.
Right.
And these are policy things. And, you know, a lot of us have different skills, but I'm glad she stepped forward. A little surprised, but I'm glad she stepped forward because this is the kind of things that she does for a living. So it's good
I
for
was
her.
going to nominate her either way once I found out I could. That's right. Check with legal
And that's
counsel
not just because
first.
she isn't here, right? You have actual
Sorry, Jessica.
documentation.
Oh, I
Having a
do,
nice
I do.
vacation.
But, you know, you could amend your motion to appoint her for life. I'm
No.
just kidding. You can't do that.
Let's call the roll, please.
Smith,
Yes.
Trotto,
Yes.
Kempner,
Yes.
Murad,
Yes.
Patterson,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Shadle,
Yes.
and Buckler.
Yes. Very good. We will take nominations for vice chair, who is currently Mr. Martin Smith. No?
No, it isn't. It was Mr. Barnett.
Oh, Mr. Barnett was vice chair. Did you used to be vice chair? That's why, okay. Yes, I'm so sorry. Yes, it was Mr. Barnett.
That's okay.
So we need a nomination for a fresh vice chair. Would you like it back, Mr. Smith?
Well, I said before, I enjoyed it. I didn't have to do a lot. Most vice presidents or chairs don't have to do a lot. The other job that was left off the list is the chairman is supposed, she or he is the liaison to city council. And that can be difficult also, as you well know. And you know, I would do it again if the board felt fit. I enjoyed it, and keeps my ear, you know, keeps me involved in things,
Then I would,
unless someone else wants it.
I nominate Commissioner Martin Smith for vice chair.
I support. Anybody else have a nomination? All right, call the roll.
Trotto.
Yes.
Kempner.
Yes.
Murad.
Yes.
Patterson.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Shadle.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
And Buckler.
Yes. All right, and secretary, who is the current
I am the
You are the
secretary.
secretary.
And treasurer.
And treasurer.
There is no
Chief bottle washer. Would you like to maintain that position, Mr. Richardson?
Well, you know, I'm getting really arthritic in my writing hand, so I'm not sure. Oh, wait, we're going electronic now? I guess I can be secretary.
Well, then, in that case, I nominate Mr. Richardson.
Support.
Is there anybody else willing or wishing to challenge him? All right, call the roll.
Kempner.
Yes.
Murad.
Yes.
Patterson.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Shadle.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Trotto.
Yes.
And Buckler.
Yes, very good. So, Mr. Smith,
Oh, that doesn't, we're not done yet. We
okay,
have
well, I was
appointments.
going to let you make the appointment, I was going to
Still
let you
your
take the
meeting.
appointments. All right, so in the matter of appointing the Planning Commission liaisons to the DDA, the Parks and Rec, the City Council, and the Chamber, we can take the City Council off that list, because that's automatically the chair, and the vice chair supports the new Madam Chair.
And ZBA is missing on this list.
Yes, ZBA is missing, and the Environmental
Environmental,
Committee is missing.
Everybody pick
And-
one.
So, with City Council covered, I recall the DDA was.
Mr. Tingari.
Was Mr. Tingari, so we need or any of our new,
I'll volunteer for the DDA.
all right, Mr. Trotto, you are DDA, very
Okay.
good. Did I get that right?
Yeah, perfect. No, those are-
Okay,
I can do
so,
Parks and Rec.
okay, Mr.
They
Patterson.
have cookies.
Right.
These are
I've heard.
appointments, so I can just make them, correct? I don't have to go through a vote. Mr. Murad, you've been chamber. Would you
Chamber,
like to
I'll continue,
continue?
yeah.
All right. Look at this, I'm even taking notes. And the Environmental Committee?
I'll continue.
Mr. Richardson, okay. And ZBA, we need a ZBA. We've been struggling with that for a while.
That's a tough job.
When does the ZBA meet?
When do they meet?
We're typically the second Monday of the month. It's as needed. We don't meet in August because there are no pending cases.
I will take ZBA if that's fine.
All right.
I believe you will also be a voting member of the ZBA
If they have an opening.
if they have an opening.
They
Because
do.
Dean
They currently do
Smith
not.
was a voting member of the ZBA as not only a liaison, so.
I think
Mr.
he was
McLean can
appointed,
fill me in on
so.
that.
Was he
yeah.
appointed?
Yeah,
Because
I
we
think he
do,
was.
I think the bylaws say that a member of the planning commission can also be a member of the ZBA. But if there's no opening, it doesn't matter
Right,
at
yeah,
this point.
there is not.
Well, take
Miles.
somebody off, Mr. McLean. My gosh.
Miles Euler did fill the spot that was vacated by Dean Smith.
That's fine. I'm happy to be in the peanut gallery, and I'll just ask lots of questions. All right, so do we have liaison reports from the old liaisons? So, Mr. Richardson, do you have anything from the Environmental Committee?
We did meet. We're not going to be meeting again until August. We did discuss a list of activities for the upcoming year. We're going to do the bike corral again. We're going to do Recycler of the Year again. We have a couple of other activities in the planning stage as well.
All right, Mr. Murad from the,
I was unable to attend the chamber meeting in this month, but I would assume they were talking about the Street Art Fest, which was 2 weekends ago? Yeah, 2 weekends ago, and upcoming Cruise Fest
Okay.
and Pub Crawl that are coming up in August, so.
do we have any other reports on any other committees? I have City Council, but I already, are two appointees, and there was a lot of other appointees to the Tree Commission and the Tree Advisory Board, or the Beautification Committee and the Trees Advisory Board, and,
Parks and Rec
oh,
did
and
not meet,
the
right?
Technology Committee. There's like a Technology Advisory Committee that's been established, so, and our City Council member liaison is with us. Do you have anything to add, Mr. Gapp?
No, I'm fine, thank you. I won't drag out your meeting any longer.
Oh, very good. And Mr. McLean, do you have any comments?
None at this time unless commissioners have questions for me.
Okay. Quick run around the room. Any other last-minute comments?
I looked, the last master plan was in fact January 2007. I happen to have it with me here, so.
Thank you.
And Mr. Patterson, are you on the?
I am.
You are, perfect, okay.
Are you, is on the ZBA?
No,
the
no,
Parks and Rec.
he's on
Oh,
the
Parks and Rec.
I
Oh, you're on
didn't
the
re-
Parks and Rec.
That's why
Okay.
it's
I
easy for me
disappeared
to-
for several
Okay, very good.
years, and when I started showing up again, there's a lot of new faces, so I just didn't know. Thank you.
Very
You're busy
good.
taking the minutes, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
I am the secretary, and they don't
There you
do
go.
digital there.
Cramp, hand cramp. All right. Anything else?
Well, I'd just like to welcome our two new
Yeah.
members and look forward to working with both of you. I think you bring some different skills to the commission, and we'll be able to use those skills.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Nope, just again, welcome the two new guys.
I don't have any comments. Good first meeting.
Welcome, and thank you for coming, keep coming.
Appreciate being on the planning commission. Look forward to the next couple of years working with everybody.
And welcome.
Thank you.
And welcome, yes. And can I have a motion to adjourn,
Oh,
please?
one more thing. I'd like to thank you, Ms. Buckler, for your service to the commission. You've been at the helm through some stormy seas, and I did not envy your position, but you stepped up, you handled it well, I thought, and I think we all should be grateful for your service.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ms. Buckler, I'd like to echo that, and also I'd like to thank Mr. Tangari and Mr. Barnett for all the work they did over the years. They'll both be
Great
missed.
members.
So,
Yeah,
I
these
will-
two have big shoes to fill.
Yes, they
Yes, you do.
I will not miss handing this over. I get a little portion of my life back. I assume my husband will be happy about that. I think he will be. Do I have a motion to dismiss, or to
Motion to
adjourn,
adjourn.
sorry. Adjourn. Second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Adjourn.